It's always good to have a lawyer involved, but what are some of the risks if lawyers are not involved in communications decisions early in a major public controversy?
For most high profile events, you see them go sideways in a number of different ways, and it almost always relates to the communication. It's connected to the underlying event, but the criticism, the critique that comes is often related to the timing of the communication. Either it was too early and something was said that was inaccurate, or that turned out later to require more context or additional facts in order to really kind of communicate about it effectively, or someone has waited too long. And so the way that there are multiple ways that things can go wrong when you don't have a lawyer saying, okay, hold on, let's think about what the facts are, right? Have we drilled down on the facts? Do we know what they are? And have we thought about how each of those facts ties into a potential legal implication? And so you can see without that protection, without somebody kind of minding the store in that way, with that lens, that you might come out and say something that, as I said, is false. And the damage that does is that it creates a scenario where you are then having to backtrack, right? The analogy of kind of the toothpaste is out of the tube and it's really hard to call it back. It's almost impossible when you've said something inaccurate about a crisis situation or a situation that is laden with legal implications that you haven't yet thought of. So coming out of the gate early will put you in a situation, without a lawyer. Coming out early without a lawyer will put you in a situation where you you run the risk of saying something that is not accurate and then having to account for that later. The other thing that you can potentially run into if you don't have early lawyer involvement is that you will fail to appreciate the significance of what it is that you're saying. Meaning, even if you're saying the accurate thing, have you thought about the framing? Have you thought about who you might have to tell before you come out and say it? That's a misstep that we see with clients a lot, right? They may be contractually obligated to notify certain business partners or certain regulatory agencies pursuant to a data share agreement. And so if you come out before you've tended to those contractual obligations, now you may have a breach of contract. You may have a regulatory issue. So even if you feel confident that your facts are correct, you may not be doing it you may not be communicating in an order that takes into account your legal implications. And then the other mistake that we see often where a lawyer doesn't sort of have some supporting role in communicating about a crisis is that the backlash comes too early and clients aren't prepared. So one of the main things that I try to do with my clients is think about what the reaction is going to be to whatever it is that we're sharing about, right? A lot of my work is in the data breach space, data security incidents. What draft holding statements do we need? We're not going to use them right away. We'll prepare them and hold. But what are those? So that the moment we communicate about the event, we are in a position to respond to the response, right? It's not just about that one communication and then you're done. It is an ongoing back and forth. It's a dialogue with the public. Whenever a high-profile client has had a high-profile incident, or if it rises to the level of a crisis, a high-profile crisis, you don't have the luxury of putting something out and not dealing with the response. You can opt to say that was your only communication on the subject. You can opt to not respond further, but that has to be strategic. So either you're saying we collectively have decided that is our only statement, or we have to prepare additional holding statements that take into account the reactions and again take into account the legal ramifications that are embedded in all of these high profile crises. And so that's really, I don't know that I answered your question in a streamlined manner, but I think it's representative of the kinds of things that a lawyer is thinking of the entire time that might be lost on a client if they come out thinking, what, my PR team will handle this. And there is a role for PR a lot of times in these situations, but often it's in the recovery, right? Like you want your PR to start to help you get back to business. How do you move on, right? What great things are going on at your organization, at your entity that you want to talk about proactively? great, let's run with that. There's a time and a place for that, and when we're ready, we'll go. But in the interim, not taking that support from counsel will ensure that, at least from a timing standpoint, or at worst from a substantive standpoint, you're making a misstep that you then have to address, as I said before, in tandem with the actual crisis. And if the crisis is big enough, if it's significant enough, the last thing you need is a layer on top of that, where you are addressing the fact that you responded incorrectly, right? It's hard enough to correctly navigate and manage a high profile crisis, right? Whether it's a CEO disgrace event, or, as I said before, a data security incident, or it's a former employee who's wreaking havoc on the company, or some a financial fraud, right? Or brick and mortar crises like an active assailant, whatever it can be. We've seen countless crises in recent years, and including in recent months with the pandemic, social movements. There are so many ways to misstep. If you have, it's okay. We'll get you back on your feet. You will recover, but you want to be doing it from the outset in a way that is thoughtful, is methodical, and is mindful of the legal implications that are sort of around every turn. And that's where counsel really can support you. It's not the kind of thing that you want to do on your own, or that you want to try to anticipate without the guardrails of legal counsel, in addition to the other support that you would use in a crisis scenario.